I want to bring in Dr. Roger Klein, the former advisor to the FDA and CDC. And Dr. Klein, let's just start with what we heard Ethan talking about, this thought out there that the number of cases could be significantly underreported at this point. From your data, from what you're watching, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Hi, Seana. Yeah, so I think there's no question that that's true. That the Goldman numbers really confirming what we already know, that the number of infections is far greater than the number of reported cases, and that's been by design. I mean, we've defined cases by people we test, and we've chosen to test only the sickest people. So the estimates are ranging from anywhere from as much as 80 times the number of infections relative to cases. In New York, serology data suggested it was 10 times. So I think this really isn't anything new. It's just confirming what we already know by another means.
Dr. Klein, with the number of cases throughout the U.S. and really throughout the world continuing to climb, we did have some positive news last week, and that was the fact that Remdesivir, the FDA, approved it for emergency use. How encouraging is this news? And then can you also talk to us about the limitations of this, the fact that it's only used or only approved now for emergency use?
Well, the emergency use part I'll address first. And what it really means is that FDA is allowed to put on the market, or to allow a company to put on the market, a drug that hasn't yet been approved. And the data on which it's based are encouraging. There was a randomized double-blind and controlled trial, which is the best. And what we found was a 3-day shortening in the time to recovery. There wasn't a statistically significant, meaning something that can be firmly established, benefit to mortality. But the hope is that if it works and it helps moderate the infection, that it will in fact save lives. I think it's actually very encouraging.
What about the distribution plan? So getting it to people in need, it's interesting because the Department of Health and Human Services saying that states with the greatest number of cases have been allocated doses of Remdesivir. The government now in charge of this distribution. Does that make sense to you?
Well, I think that there are reasons for it. It's a very interesting dynamic. So you have a situation from the pharma industry, from the pharma side, where you have something that hasn't been done before, to my knowledge, at least in modern times in this way, where you now have government in control of distribution of a drug. So I think that's something to keep one's eye on. It could set precedents that are potentially problematic. But on the other hand, from Gilead's viewpoint, I think it could be useful. First of all, they don't have to make the decisions as to who gets the drug. So that kind of takes them off the hook. The second, to the second point, this drug is not approved. It's given under an emergency use authorization. And perhaps having the government distribute it gives them some layer of legal protection in the event that problems ensue from use of the drug in certain settings, or people think they do, or accuse the drug of causing certain problems.
Dr. Klein, what about supply? Because that's another potential issue here down the road. RBC was out, one of their analysts saying that the number of doses of Remdesivir being allocated to the U.S. is much smaller than what was initially expected, and that it could run out by this summer.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, look, they're going to ramp up manufacturing of this drug, especially if it works. So I think there's always a concern, but those shortages and those types of shortages tend to be filled relatively quickly, and we've seen that. We saw that with ventilators, for example. What ends up happening is the projections tend to overstate the demand, and the ability of the companies to respond tends to be understated. So I think it's a concern, but I think it's probably not at this point a serious risk.
Dr. Klein, I also want to ask you about cost, because that's still a question out there, and that's something that has been making numerous headlines over the last several days. So how do you think Gilead will price Remdesivir? Do you think it will, one, set a bar for other coronavirus drugs? And then from your viewpoint, how do you think this should be done?
Yeah, so right now it's free. So that's an interesting way to price it. I've seen modeling, and you've probably seen the same models that have priced it anywhere from $10 a dose to over 4,000 based upon the efficacy and what it accomplishes. I mean, I really do think in an ideal world that latter price point would be the appropriate one, in the sense that what the drug accomplishes would be the price of it. I mean, I think some people have amortized the costs already it was designed for another use, and they've already written off those costs, and so there you would get a very, very low estimate. But I think a lot of these drugs, it takes the manufacture of it is relatively inexpensive. It's the development costs, and it really, most drugs fail early. You put lots and lots of money into them, and I think it's important to reimburse pharmaceutical products at a price that encourages people to make them. This is going to be a drug that could be of no value in a year. So I think there's a lot of risk to it, and I think we need to encourage the company to go ahead and provide it. They and other companies that are working on similar products.
Dr. Klein, I also quickly want to get your thoughts just on the timing of the reopenings, because if you look overseas at some of the data that we're getting, we're seeing fresh outbreaks in South Korea, also Germany now seeing a bit of a resurgence. Does this worry you at a time when we're seeing some areas of the country reopen when they're still seeing the number of cases climb?
The whole thing is worrisome, but also 33 million people filing unemployment claims is worrisome too. And I think what we need to do is we need to look and understand the health issue in the context of what is a devastating situation from an economic standpoint, where we have potentially as much as 18 to 20% unemployment right now if you consider the people who've dropped out of the workforce. I think we have to be realistic about this virus. The likelihood is, and I really hope it goes away, the likelihood is it won't. It transmits very easily, and there are way too many mild and asymptomatic cases just to think it's going to disappear. And I think we need to learn to live with it, and that means moving forward. And so I would highly encourage municipalities and counties and states to go forward, try to figure out the best ways to deal with it, work really hard to try to protect those who are at most risk. We know this virus really kills a very small, maybe 2, 3, 4 out of 1,000 people it infects. We already know that. We've got lots of data. You have the Goldman data, but they're behind. We have prisoner data that of people in Ohio, Marion Correctional Institute, where older, sicker male population, they've got about a 0.5, 0.6% death rate. Over 80% of the prisoners that were infected, they tested everybody. 96% presented with no symptoms. So I think we need to be realistic about this disease. It's very serious for some people. I don't want to underestimate it, but I also think it would be reckless to underestimate the severe economic consequences of prolonged shutdowns. These losses, these job losses that people think are temporary, could become permanent.
Yeah, well, it goes back to the balancing act that Mayor Wheeler was talking about in the last segment. Just you have to weigh the economic impact and then also take into account the public health as well. So Dr. Klein, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.